The dark truth behind NXIVM. What the world's most dangerous cult didn't look dangerous at all. No robes, no remote compound, no armed guards, just expensive seminars, smiling executives, and promises of self-improvement. Behind the polished image of NXIVM was a hidden system of control, manipulation, blackmail, and abuse that trapped hundreds, including celebrities, heiresses, and business leaders. This is a story of how one man built a psychological empire in plain sight, and how it all came crashing down. In the late 1990s, NXIVM presented itself as a revolutionary personal development company. Founded by Keith Raniere, the organization claimed to help people unlock human potential through workshops called executive success programs. Participants paid thousands of dollars to attend multi-day courses designed to break psychological barriers and build success. To outsiders, it looked like a premium self-help movement for ambitious professionals. But inside, students were slowly introduced to a rigid hierarchy where obedience was rewarded and doubt was punished. Members were taught that emotional pain was weakness and loyalty was strength. The deeper you went, the more your identity became tied to the organization. By the early 2000s, NXIVM had attracted wealthy elites, entrepreneurs, and even members of the influential Bronfman family, whose financial backing helped the organization expand rapidly. What began as coaching soon evolved into something much darker. Keith Raniere carefully crafted his image as a once-in-a-generation genius. Followers referred to him as Vanguard, a title that elevated him above ordinary leadership. He claimed to possess extraordinary intelligence, deep philosophical insight, and solutions to humanity's biggest problems. His followers saw him as a mentor, thinker, and visionary, but former members described something else entirely: a master manipulator who studied human vulnerability with disturbing precision. Raniere built emotional dependency by alternating praise with criticism, creating a psychological loop that made followers crave approval. Members were encouraged to confess personal traumas, insecurities, and secrets during sessions, material that would later become leverage. The more someone trusted the system, the easier it became to control them. What made Raniere especially dangerous was not force, but persuasion. He convinced intelligent adults to surrender autonomy willingly, believing it was personal growth. NXIVM gained legitimacy through strategic recruitment. Among its most visible members was actress Allison Mack, known for a role on the TV series Smallville. Mack became one of the organization's most devoted recruiters, using her celebrity influence to attract new members. With high-profile endorsements in elite social circles, NXIVM appeared increasingly credible. Wealthy individuals joined networking events, executive coaching sessions, and private retreats. Members were told they were entering an exclusive intellectual community. Instead, they were entering layers of control. The organization's sophistication was its camouflage. No one expects danger from smiling professionals discussing growth strategies over coffee in luxury hotels. Then came DAS's secret society hidden inside NXIVM. Officially, it was described as a women's empowerment group. In reality, it operated as a coercive master-slave hierarchy. Women were recruited through secrecy and promises of growth. Before entry, they were required to provide collateral: explicit photos, damaging confessions, financial documents, or deeply personal secrets. This collateral ensured obedience. Once inside, recruits were assigned masters, expected to follow strict rules, including restrictive diets, sleep schedules, and immediate responses to commands. Some members were branded near the pelvic area, with a symbol later revealed to contain Keith Raniere's initials. Many participants were told the branding ritual was symbolic empowerment. Only later did they fully understand the extent of manipulation. By then, fear, shame, and psychological dependency made escape incredibly difficult. For years, NXIVM's control system remained intact because silence was its strongest weapon. Members were conditioned to believe that speaking out meant betrayal, and betrayal meant destruction of their identity, reputation, and relationships. But silence eventually breaks under pressure. The first cracks appeared when former members began sharing their experiences anonymously online and with journalists. At first, their stories seemed unbelievable claims of secret branding rituals, blackmail material, and forced obedience inside a self-help organization. Many dismissed them as exaggerations or misunderstandings. But as more testimonies surfaced, a disturbing pattern emerged. Different voices, same structure, same abuse mechanisms. What once looked like isolated complaints began forming a clear picture of systemic psychological control hidden beneath the surface of a corporate self-improvement empire. As allegations grew, federal authorities began quietly building a case. Investigators started connecting financial records, witness statements, and internal documents that revealed a structured system of coercion. What made the case unique was its complexity. NXIVM did not operate like a traditional criminal organization. It operated like a corporate training program with hidden layers of psychological manipulation. Surveillance intensified. Evidence pointed toward forced labor, extortion, and interstate trafficking tied to the organization's inner circle. Meanwhile, Keith Raniere remained hidden, continuing operations while under increasing scrutiny. The organization's public image still appeared stable, but behind closed doors, panic was spreading. Members were instructed to stay silent, avoid media, and reinforce loyalty. But it was already too late. The system was being mapped piece by piece. The turning point came when the existence of DOS was fully exposed. Investigators uncovered that what was publicly presented as a women's empowerment group was, in reality, a coercive hierarchy built on control and fear. The concept of collateral became central to understanding the system. Members had unknowingly surrendered materials that could destroy their personal lives if released. This ensured compliance without physical force. The branding ritual, once described as symbolic, was revealed to be a literal marking of ownership disguised as empowerment. Survivors described emotional breakdowns, identity confusion, and long-term psychological trauma. For many, the realization did not happen immediately. It unfolded slowly, as trust collapsed and the meaning of every instruction was reinterpreted through a darker lens. Inside the courtroom, the illusion of NXIVM finally disintegrated under sworn testimony. Former members stood before the court and described years of manipulation, control, and psychological conditioning. Each testimony added another layer of clarity to what had once been hidden behind corporate language and self-help branding. Prosecutors laid out the structure of the organization step by step, revealing how obedience was engineered and reinforced. The defense attempted to frame the organization as consensual, but the weight of survivor testimony made that narrative increasingly difficult to sustain. The emotional impact in the courtroom was overwhelming. Some witnesses broke down while recounting their experiences, while others spoke with controlled precision, determined to ensure the truth was fully documented. The courtroom became the stage where silence finally lost its power. The sentencing marked the final collapse of NXIVM's leadership structure. Keith Raniere was ultimately convicted on multiple federal charges, including racketeering and exploitation offenses tied to the organization's operations. In court, the judge described the extent of harm caused and the calculated nature of the system built under Raniere's leadership. The sentence reflected the severity of the crimes and the years of manipulation inflicted on victims. Outside the courtroom, reactions were mixed relief from survivors, shock from former supporters, and disbelief from those who once viewed NXIVM as a legitimate organization. The legal outcome closed one chapter, but for many survivors, the psychological recovery was only beginning. Justice had been delivered in court, but the long-term emotional consequences remained. After the collapse of NXIVM, attention turned to how such a system was able to exist for so long in plain sight. The answer was not secrecy alone, but perception. NXIVM did not appear as a cult, it appeared as ambition, education, and opportunity. That disguise allowed it to operate in elite circles without immediate suspicion. The aftermath left behind a powerful warning about influence, authority, and psychological manipulation. Survivors rebuilt their lives. Journalists documented the full scope of the case, and investigators studied how similar systems might be identified earlier in the future. The story of NXIVM is not only about one organization, it is about how belief, trust, and ambition can be redirected into control when critical thinking is replaced with blind loyalty. Even after the arrests and convictions, the real damage of NXIVM did not disappear with the collapse of its leadership. Survivors described a long and painful psychological aftershock that continued years after leaving the organization. Many struggled with guilt, confusion, and identity fragmentation, as the belief systems they once trusted had been completely dismantled. Some could not immediately accept that what they experienced was abuse, because for years it had been framed as growth. Psychologists who studied former members noted patterns similar to trauma bonding, where victims develop emotional attachment to their manipulators due to cycles of reward and fear. The recovery process was not linear. It was fragmented, slow, and deeply personal. For many, the hardest part was not what happened inside NXIVM, but learning how to live outside its influence. Experts analyzing NXIVM concluded that its power did not rely on physical force, but on belief systems carefully constructed over time. Members were not simply told what to do, they were taught to reinterpret reality itself. Concepts like ethical obedience and personal responsibility were used to reframe compliance as virtue. This made resistance feel like personal failure rather than liberation. Over time, members began self-policing their thoughts, actions, and emotions. Control became internalized. The psychological architecture is what made NXIVM so difficult to recognize from the outside. It was not built on fear alone, but on identity transformation. By the time external observers noticed something was wrong, many individuals had already accepted the system as part of who they were. Once mainstream media began covering NXIVM in detail, global attention intensified rapidly. Documentaries, investigative reports, and survivor interviews revealed the scale of the organization's influence. What shocked audiences most was not only the abuse itself, but how long it remained hidden in plain sight. Many viewers questioned how educated professionals and public figures could become involved. The story spread across international news platforms, sparking debates about psychological manipulation, consent, and institutional oversight. NXIVM became more than a legal case. It became a cultural reference point for modern coercion disguised as self-improvement. The media exposure ensured that the story would not fade quietly into obscurity. For survivors, life after NXIVM meant rebuilding from psychological ruins. Many had to reconstruct relationships, careers, and personal identities from the ground up. Some spoke publicly to help others understand coercive control systems, while others chose silence as part of their healing. Support networks became essential in this process, as isolation had once been a core tool of manipulation. Slowly, survivors began reclaiming autonomy in small but meaningful ways, making independent decisions, trusting their instincts again, and redefining their sense of self. The rebuilding process was not about forgetting the past, but about learning to exist beyond it. Each step forward represented a quiet victory over years of psychological conditioning. The NXIVM case has become a global case study in psychological manipulation, showing how influence can evolve into control when unchecked. Experts emphasize that warning signs often appear early: excessive secrecy, rigid hierarchy, emotional dependency, and the elevation of leaders beyond criticism. Yet these signs are often dismissed when wrapped in success language or personal development frameworks. The most important lesson from NXIVM is that intelligence does not protect against manipulation. Instead, awareness, skepticism, and critical thinking are essential safeguards. Systems of control often thrive not in darkness, but in environments where trust is absolute and questioning is discouraged. The story of NXIVM is not only about a fallen organization, it is about human vulnerability, trust, and a desire for meaning. It shows how easily the search for self-improvement can be redirected into systems of control when boundaries are blurred and authority is unquestioned. While the legal case has ended, its implications continue to influence how society understands psychological coercion today. The darkness of NXIVM was not in its secrecy alone, but in its ability to appear as something hopeful. And that is what makes its story so important to remember. The illusion finally began to crack when former members came forward. Investigative journalists exposed the existence of DOS, revealing the branding rituals, collateral system, and abusive control mechanisms. Public outrage exploded. Federal investigators launched inquiries. In 2018, Keith Raniere fled to Mexico, but was later arrested and extradited to the United States. The trial exposed years of manipulation, racketeering, forced labor, identity exploitation, and abuse. Former insiders testified against the organization, dismantling the myth piece by piece. In 2020, Keith Raniere was sentenced to 120 years in federal prison. Allison Mack later pleaded guilty to racketeering charges and was sentenced as well. The empire that once marketed success, ethics, and enlightenment have been revealed as a machine built on fear and control. The NXIVM story is a reminder that manipulation rarely arrives looking dangerous. It often arrives dressed as opportunity, purpose, or belonging. Behind polished branding and promises of transformation was a system that preyed on ambition, insecurity, and trust. The most unsettling part? Many victims were highly educated, successful, and intelligent. Cults do not recruit weakness, they exploit human needs. And sometimes, the most dangerous prisons are the ones people walk into willingly.